الشيش يخستيني يا خانا وساختو يكيايكي يا أوا أختو وسكو داتي قتلتكي شوخوا آيا يا هشجون يا هاتلا يننخ قاها إيش يننخ أوا يا أخشجون آيا يا أدو قل يا قسقا يدك قنيك يا أخشجون دات يدك قنيك يا قل أختلا يننخ أختلا دو إيش أختلا دو تلا قل أختلا دو شت خسقا أختلا دو كيك خسقا أختلا دو إيك خس يوش دكتاس تشوغو نخستي جاكوي أدي أيا وش ودشاي يا قنيت قناي أو هستو توسقو قل ييل نخستي جاك نخستي وجين هس ودشاي وان قنينز قاتو وسقو يعيش هس تشوكو نخستي أقائي يدكي أيا تشتك الدجخن دي أوه جاكوي قاتو وسقون يا يدت وان قنينز تشوكو نخستي وش هس ودشاي قاجاكو دا تلنجت قستي هشواسا أوتيخو يا قل قاوقشيك أيا يقك كتان يا أختوسكو يسكو جا دوسا أوي تلتكتحس يا أو أختوسكو يسكو أدوسخ ستي أوي تلتكتحس يا إقنيت قناي شوخوا آيا هستو إنيوقك كتان قل هستو آني كوك أوي قل يا آق قوان قاوقشيك أوي يقك وطان قان قاقيد يدو ساقو أت شوخوا آيا قل شيش أوي أخكاني ين ووش كتان أجوي هستو آني كوك آيا يكوخاو إتخ أخ إيش هس أخ إيش هس أوي كاقوان تان أخ خيلكو هس دكتوي دي أغا أوي جا دوساخ وستين قل وش خنك أيال دكتا شاقون هسايا كاقواسا تيقوي دي قل كاقوانتان أو يخوقا كاقوانتان دي يخوقا أقا أوي قل خوستين شنقو كيدي جا دوسا تساقوي دي يا ينيدي أختواسكو هس أوسكو هس خوستين أجوي هس كاقواسا قاوقشيك أقا قاج أشتكت أخكانيا جاك نخستي قاقوج نخستي يا أوي قل جاكوت أتسو ستين ديكينا خستي قايوبك قسامي هس خستين هس قاقواسا قاوقشيك يا أوي ها قستي هالشنجت قستي يل نخستي قل تلحستو داتي يقاقوتان قاوقشيك دي أوي قل قنلشيش يختيتان قلشيني دي آني كوكايا وش كنخبتو داات تسياتا تلحختواشكو خد الشيخ تش خد الشيخ يخ أوي قل يا جشوكو نخستي كاي شيخي أجوي تلحختواشكو يا قويخ قنخوي قلتك خد قويخ أيا أكاي هاوتي تلحختواشكو يقختتاني هاك ديني جتوني تلايك قلت إتخ يا أخ تشوكو نخستي هستو إيدي يقاقوتان كديني جيني يوهان قلتشيش قاوقشيخ قا تلايك تلا يخوتي يا أوه just يوهان قا قل وش خنك ين Unqaniins ischaqudiidi yuqaqartullaat. Yeawa Lingit Haa Ajoy Qunni aya yaqan qaqit Haa Qewchni qa Achtla du du tlak. Qannachawe achitas with the she. Yisitinge hu Kagwantan. Yisitinge hu Teqwedi. Yisitinge Khan Hasakawanika Dusaha in Haa Ye awa qannachawe achitas with the she. Ya ashtuqa khatatitsu. Qunni aya Haa Ḳusteeyí yakwahih. Ya Anax Lingítx Walli tuasaku Haa Ḳusteeyí tuchaya yiqisti. Gulchisha qiti sa akhi. Wasayi tu jadadia Lingit Ħusteeyí qan qaqit yuqatangi.
Gulchisha yuqatangi. Khatso yewe khwaji. Tlesach tuawish ko yuqahtatan wekuik atskani qapt khwajifit tlelushka.
Goyachwan. Atusatsu. Yatatsu. Atus'i qa tasametsu. Ide kakkunitlet qaq enaqtsu. Hatachkankiyan team. Play the hinawe. Ya yanwad hasqewawus. Wasaqatuqa chutlay awe dakus gitawe with okane. Yehayaw saqa. Ati. Aqa awe kedin aya akhi sanuk. With okane. Qunachawe yage. Qa yuqatangi hastu in. Ya tlelqaq inachwan qaninst. Okane yuqatang qutzati. Ye awe khwa just chuoya. Qunachawe. Just chakuta yanwad tin. Hechwasakoqa. Ya tatsuqa. Yet okane. Ya just has to kukik the way chayeku genki Awla chayeku genk. Ya tayach. Hechwasaku asatu asago at Lingit qinach. Aqa ya tatsukwal itachkankiyan. Ya has to kukik the chunk. Ya achtuasaku. Ya yet kitsu. Kunachoy achtuasaku and Lingit hasawa achaya achchi. Ajoy just Lingit qinachaya yuqachtatan wan qanins. Nizchaltakat at the dad. Ya awe chish. Adusatsu wasaku yuqitani.
Uhan qua gunanach sitioe uhanach ish has dashta quan yudu asaka danaka chinach met zich tuchut ana where Lingit chinach wat zich nach city owe uhan ajoy wat zich kan met zich just Diego genk good ede wat zich kan met dich. Ha llys go haws yw gyda'i. Ha lle iach ty ach ish dy ish yew orca kwan yew ti. Gwnnall tish.
How? Okay. Ya qunna awe hachita zawati asai watsich. Lingítx atach aayí ajoy gwell wan qanins jaygu gengi jashugo. Gwell tashoni gwell tagish hechasaku. Ya natasahini yuduasak. Ya wan qanins khoach na dashahini natasahini. Ya natasahini ye awe naski achwaach adeyuk adutla atgiya. Carcross koa. Sha dag edach caribou cross you do a sago at late hawk enach. Clay de hinaya ak buti. Got soe. Gosh 2001 hechasago got tleka talk show hichen. Antonia Jack you do sago no way we clay nachayan walk. Kesha in wsiteeyi dat. Wega koa wsiteen. Oh. What the shan konach Lidziya atwagudi. Kleed hawk enach katkinach awayuchtan stayekuking. Lingítx enach hoa. Litzin awe konach away de tuyeti. Lagao. Gwalho awe kelkadeen aya. A kadach chatsawla ha. Ho awe hoa. Hain ayashkautlinik. Ja, shatkiatsko wsiteeyi. Ja, qawe haneli. Ja, diya nachawe we do a. Wasatu sago at salki sha. Salki sha awe do sago. Taat yin awe konachawe. Tu a chew chatka ach in ag. Ja, qonne aya qoal te khatyat atk qonne aya. Yat ayach yati. Echwachi you an kawa a. Achati, wasa atka qonne. Gan awe, gan de awe wushich ach ish. Out di so we gao. Ausatin. Wat sich. Wasashi at the hain. Joyal the cut we sha. Yatayahe ausani. Ya I det ko a tleshadaye uti. Ya wat sich. Akoe ake uti. Ye awe ko achtu edach. Yatayahe yukatangi. Tlesh ach yukatangi awa. Adatu tuchte tangwasa atune wanach so e tleshachan aya. Haslu guk ya dat haslu guk ya wat sich. Has shout the hinen awe you has like has shout the hayen. Ja dat quad like just one qanins ya play nach wat dacht nach awe with this team. Ik gulchish achin ki ya ish hasada. Atu sasu du toasagu yuchetani. Ja, dat gol just Lingítx enach aya hatuasagu atchtuleyechi. Ja, qawaqshiyik yuqatangi. Ha ish hasyananach, hatla hasyananach. Yo adati qawtulatkin. Ujaga.
Oh. Kwi walks a going away, Kach. Yidika Katan. Tree Guad. How? De Huatrisikur to which Yaach Sari Shakawish. Kashkakan Hatsiti. The city dach. Ach ish hasquawis wush kitan. Klekshan gukwe de you has wuhan koa. Klekslagene di. Aya Draye gugink Yaach Shagun. Ye in can Katlanik diach to what which I could do a hit. Ja, Haa Ḥusteeyí has Ḥatqu Iqhinigtach Ilkatwulligaz Tlahwach Haa Ḥusteeyí aayí Tla aayú Qukakhatin aaqa sit tlain Jatik wsiteeyin Yaayitati yahatlatki Yauktaat Awe Yaayitat Yektushkit map kak Chitna Ha'aniyi Klen kak Awe Achtla Iqkahaqan City Dechayu Chitni to a sago yetach Lawadu Lilk Tlani Anach in Kak Lilk Klein Eleanor Hobson you to Sagun the Cordova Deutli Gaz Just the cut to Kitin Chitnatach the Jutle Konach Ish Hasnianach Yakawadu to Lilko Has Sitin Quashka Khan Has Tuik Kahakwan Yi Tlatkawe Kokasti you on Kitch Julkokasti Jikwayu Ach Ish Yatu Klatu Art Has Dastia Nelly Lord Kodu Keek Achkwe Lena Farkas Judachinachas Wujekasawa Jun Achdat at the way Yagawa Yehasa June Yahastu Astu Eek Awetsu Ya zu Ektek Ragud Yanachzu Ektek Ragud Yudak Kadach Cleowdutsi Achsari Sak zu Shakau Ishi Ekokosti Yag Hastu Kalk Utunach Yewa Khatudli Ish Ya Ach Ish Hastunach the Quashka Kwanda Tranchatu City Has Kwayu Kira Ach Klahasi which in Khawasistien Ya Quashka Kwan Ka Kahakwan Tle Dechawe Ach Saika Wudziti Tlayechawe Khatkira Ach Shagun Cordova Dachawe Kachitna Dach Ach Tlanianach Ach Tlahasawe Iak Shu Ka Atna Shu Ya Ach Ish Hasko Ach Lingítx Dach City Kaya Ach Tlatunach Kunach Lingítx Einach Yusqalla Atgin zu you Chitnag Ya Wuchester Shagun Kunach Clewe Gedein Ade Wushtik Zichadiye Ya Haa Ḥusteeyí You Iqkahaqwan Khasitiyi Kaya Ach Ish Has Kira Lingítx City Achrawish Tu Qadli Tu Ya Yuqatank Ya Ach Ish Has Yuqatangi أقوى جو خليلكو هسيخ هستو قيخوا ياكتات قان لكن الشيشخ ايتي ساخي جيكو قينك قيسكو تو يا أناx Lingítx خطو الستيات
يا
Gynulleidfa un I cananigi I siagundat stwgachad I ti chwasacwan I chaqawuz qua hell ach daya kushuska chat woodley ish was Lingit you atanktin dasawa chat woodley ish
أخ إيش قوت ستي يا وشو تن أقواس which in hardly إيش تن we have the same father
daya kushuska
أقواس وقت ودلي إيش لب إيش هس خيو هس وستي يا قواساي هس
Gynulleidfa ach ini cananigi
كنا تشيش يخد خيوزي يكيه
وسا أختوك إنه إختليلكو هسستو إني أختتاني يا قنخ أوي وك أديو هسك أولت كنيا خواسا هستو تول آن إنه أخين أختو يكي قنخ أوي إساي أوي أدات أوي خو قا يناخ ستي قاش Lingítx ستي يأوي يا يدتي قال كنا خوي تل قاتن دتاني أوي هخويتي قال يأوي خو تل Lingítx قستي أوي خو يا هايو قتنجي تنقو تل ويتا يخ تل BIA تندتاني أوي هاتو وسكو يا هخوخ يا هتاقو خاخو يا هساوسكون دات أتينخ هايتي يتكلي يا خوي وهان يا Lingítx ستي يأوى هاتوتي وجاقود يقتنجي تنقوا تلقى تطلاق يا هاليلكو هس هاليلكو هس تقستي هس يقتنجي قنخويك أجوير تويك يا يدت قل هس تجي سيج أيك جنك خكاكتن يداسا داتوي يقتلاتكن قا داسا هس تتوسكو هس أوسكو هس خكاكتوز شيش تلاقي
تلاقيك اختواسك ويتلاقي تيات ويقتنجي خوي خوتي يا جلتكت وفان أناx Lingítx خاوس ستي قود ستي جلتكت وهان جلتكت يدخ Lingítx أيو وشت كوديكت جاك جول تاسق قستي جيتسو جول يا ريتتا ديوت السكوية Lingít ديكينا تسخن قننا كوا قاقوا كجلتكت يدخيو وشت كوديكت يلينجت آنكهج كأقاوه Lingítx تخو السيتي أخوها تحسوه وهان هسوه أتشويس إنك خنيك جلتكات وهان أناx Lingítx خاو سيتي أتيا خود سيتي جوج أوغو دخ كدين سو دسكوين Nobody started Lingít. Everybody became Lingít somehow.
أوا قسخن أجيد خي وشلشيش تلاقي هنا يأو أداتي وتختتن جاي تدخل قاو يأوا غاين أوا شكاوت نيجن Tleidihina Yatayach. Yahaani Owe Talk. An Goon Owe Duani. Yahaani Owe Tleidihin. Yachakut Kuu. Haa Aniqataya Hasuat. Aqa Owe Hasituasuku Guch. Guch Owe Hasawlechen. Waqain. Ye Owe Adati Tuchtatan one Qanins. Which a good kuu, which like ha in hasakawanik, Qanach away, Tushak on away the catwishing it. Clegg, Kusachan away hatuyeti. Clady away has to cut away, it were good, which a good kuu. Away has to us a good has our lechen. Aqa away, the cut yeka away kuishi. The Kadeshi away, where on Gun Kuu. Kainach awe ka, a yawat lak, ya has to jeet aya. A ka away a dati to it on, ha, hatwunech, yak away. A yuk ko our ach, to yeet a yake u ik, aus a coup, has our shot. Go away, go satiach yeet. Wasach hasachanoe ach yidach to wasaku to in hatsati. Haa Ǩusteeyí guchsati. Dach to wasaku ach yid in hatsati. A joy do yid chanthushi. Kashasa ya nachultin away ya ha woosh to schani. A joy ach to wasaku yisaku. Wanach saya aya ha in a kawanik. Ya ha yanwad. Datjach sahawuti in chak. A joy tlidzi away. Ha ya do glaki. Tleikhiach away nu yachyeti away hakuun. Gilchish away haketi sa achil te katyuhan. Gilchish away wuchin yu katillatki. Tleidu shugao. Gwash tleidka yu katangi away ade. Shukwatan yaha yu katangi. Gilchish. So we'll do a little walkthrough of what we talked about. Thank you for the suggestions on things to discuss. And these sessions are recorded, so you could, if you study Tlingit for 5-10 years, just come back and listen to it. And a lot of us, we're trying stuff. We're learning all the time. You gotta just sort of get it to a language of use. That's such a huge step to take, is to make it not something that you're just absorbing and being around, but that you are actively putting to use. And that includes making mistakes, and some of those mistakes are language mistakes, and some of those mistakes are cultural mistakes, and it's going to be okay. These are safe spaces to learn, and we're going to do our best to correct things as we go without discouraging anybody. Like it's really hard to just sort of create an environment where it's just enjoyable to talk, and that's genocide for you. But back to what we were talking about. So I started off kind of talking about speaking in public, and so it always depends, like how you talk. It depends on if people are listening that you don't know, or if it gets into this realm of public speaking. Haa Ḳusteeyí was another thing I said quite a bit, which was before the eyes of the people. So if something happens in front of the people, that becomes a big deal. And that means you just talk a little bit more. It's a little bit more structured, the way that you talk. And so a lot of times you would stand up, and it depends where you were at. So a lot of times if I was going to stand up, I would, first of all, just say hello and acknowledge my opposites. So if I'm a raven, so I'm going to talk to those eagles first. And my general way of doing that is whoever's land I'm on, that's who I'm going to start with, and thank them for allowing me to be there and that we could gather and that this is their land, and that we are guests. And then I would move out from there and acknowledge my father's clan, and then my mother's father's clan, and then clans that I have close relationships with. So Haa Ḳusteeyí married into Llukach Adi, and I have close relationships through my auntie and her children. And so but it also depends on who's there too. So when I was being taught about speaking in public, it was a lot of my aunties, so Nora Dowenhauer and Kathy Dennis, and they would sit next to me and they say, okay, see that person? They're this clan. See that person? They're that clan. And I would just sit there making notes and try to, you're not supposed to use notes when you stand up to talk. And so that's the other thing. So you write it all down, but then when you get up, just leave your notebook there. And that's a hard thing to do, you know. But then you try to really acknowledge, and you try not to miss folks, because then you might be close friends with someone and they're wsiteeyi, and you forget to mention that clan, and they might get kind of hurt. So that, you know, there are some, but this is public speaking. This is like in front of the people. And there's times when we'll be running classes and we'll just practice this stuff. And so then you might acknowledge, if you're a guest, like if we were in Yakutat, I might mention the clans that I know of that are the Raven clans there, but it'd be very brief, because it's kind of, you don't want to brag about yourself, and so you're always careful not to address your own moiety in front of people, especially things like, you know, if it was our tu'ik, if it was our potlatch, I wouldn't want to stand up and say, boy, good job, all you Llukach Adi. Like, that's really bad form as far as like Tlingit culture. You could tell them privately, and when you're all sort of at the little thing, you finally put away the last chairs and everything, and then you could just say, oh, that was good, and I'm going to bed because I'm tired. But you try not to do that stuff publicly, because that's considered praising yourself. And so that's kind of what I started talking about, Kushik and Shaqaish, if you want to chime in at all and share some of the things that you were talking about, and then we'll circle back.
I'd like to second what you're saying about when you give speeches, there's protocols, and you want to have lots of experience standing behind your uncle and whispering in his ear when you remember something he doesn't, and just getting brave by having people stare at you and not having to talk. But one time I went to a memorial that I was a guest, and in the middle there somewhere, when they brought the berries out, somebody stood up and they just started bragging about all of the people from that clan that picked so many berries to bring them out, and thanked them so ridiculously profusely. And that was really bad form. So you can thank them privately, and you can tell your opposite in the audience. If you want it to be mentioned, the opposite can make those kind of statements and can brag about the hosts, how wonderful it was that they went out to pick so many berries, but it's not appropriate for you to brag about your own clan, your own aunties and uncles, your own. The exception to that is when you're talking about your shagun, your ancestors. You have to. Today, we don't have people who will stand up and talk for you. That was the old way. Somebody would stand up and brag about you, usually an opposite person. and they would tell all this delicate information that might sound like you're bragging if you said it. Today, in the 21st century, we've learned that we have to, we're not that connected anymore, and we don't know each other that well anymore. And so for the last 50 years, our elders have been struggling with how to blend tradition with the Western culture. And they have encouraged and supported and explained how to do it, how to talk about yourself. And I just wanted to say, now that I can say something in English, kunach shtuqa khareti shagau ish yuqatangi kunach yake. And your ability to use the language in a traditional cultural way is just amazing. I learned something for you every time you talk. Please talk more often. I have one more request. I'm just going to put it in the chat and then not say anything because it might sound like I'm bragging.
And Nila Toga, do you want to share some of the things that you were talking about?
I heard you talking about our parents and our lines. So I shared that my dad's people are Kunana or Athabaskan, and my dad's father was Iat. Our word in Danaka for caribou is Medzich, and the word in Tlingit, I've heard it called Watzich. So I was saying they're only just a little bit different. And then I heard you say later that the word for Tlingit from caribou came from Athabaskan, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, and then it got me also thinking about caribou and Carcross. I've heard 3 different names for Carcross. So I just stick with Natasahini, and I just I heard Kechne speaking Tlingit with Ada Haskins, who's Yenyidi and lived in Skagway, and she was saying Na Da Shahini, and then I heard Haa Ḳusteeyí, Norman James say Natasahini, and I've heard Tla Ida Kalmegan say, I always forget how to say, what's the name of that whitefish? Natasahine. So I think that was it. And so, but anyways, I was thinking about a time I was there about 20 years ago, and I got to just sort of sit and watch an elders conference, and they're talking about caribou. And there was a lady there, I think her name was Antonia Jack, and she was quite elderly. Like she had to walk real slow, and when she spoke English, she was very quiet. But when she spoke Tlingit, she was just booming, and I was like, "Whoa, the strength!" And she was sharing that when she was young, they lived in this house down by the lake, and you could look across and see Gopher Mountain, and it was in the middle of the night, and she was a kid, and she was sleeping, and all of a sudden the whole ground is just shaking, and they thought it was an earthquake, and they were kind of getting a little panicked, and her dad ran out the door, and it was mooning out Ladis, so the moon was shining, and there were so many caribou on the mountain that the whole mountain seemed like it was just moving. And it was really wild because there's no, you can go quite, I mean, I don't live there, but I know you got to go kind of a bit of a ways away to see them now. And it just makes me think about stuff that happened. And then Shaqawish joined us. You want to summarize what you said for us?
Sure. So he told me, Khune told me in Tlingit a little bit about what people were talking about before I joined, and so it got me thinking about what I wanted to say. And what I explained first was who I am. My name is Shaqawish. Some of you already know me from previous classes or interactions, or just from being around in Tlingit Ani. And I am Kwashkakwan from the Moon House. And I explained a little bit about how that came to be, how I became Kwashkakwan from the Moon House. So I got into talking about my father and my mother and their families. My father's Wushkitan from the Fort House. And so they're on the wolf side. Kwashkakwan is on the raven side. And on my mother's side, I'm actually what we would call in Tlingit Iqkahakwan. I'm a copper digger from the lower Copper River. So that generally refers to Adna Athabascans, but in my mother's line, we're actually half Adna and half Eyak. And so my ancestors could speak both languages, and there were a lot of intermarriages between what is today the Cordova area and the Chitna area. And those two places are both pretty close to Yakutat. And so my mother's side actually has ties on the Tlingit side to Yakutat, and my father's side has Adna and Eyak ties to the Copper River. And anyway, the Quashkaqwan have become Tlingit hundreds of years ago now. Hundreds of years before the Haa came in their ships from across the ocean. And the Athabascan and Eyak speaking people from where my mom is from, they were, just considered to be copper diggers. But they always maintained a close relationship to their relatives in Yakutat, the ones that had already become Tlingit. And I didn't get into telling the story of how that happened, but when I was going to be born, my father's mother's paternal aunts, so my father's grandfather's sisters, had a dream that their brother was going to be born again. And they knew that from talking to my mother that they were from originally the same group of people. And what they realized was that this new child that was going to be born was going to be their brother coming back to them. So they decided that they would give me his name. And because their family is the one that named me, and because I was raised in Yakutat, that's the house that claimed me. It's the house that I belong to is the Moon House of Yakutat, even though I was born into the Canyon clan of Chitna. So I explained a little bit of that, and then I also explained that for every clan in Tlingit history, there's a story like this. And they always call it, every time they call it, Anax Lingítx Haa Ţusteeyí. It's the events through which we have become Tlingit. And what this really means is who we are today is as a result of our entire history. Everything goes into it, and our history is very diverse, and we come from many different places. When you're looking at our clan histories, they're all unique. And so in that way, like we've come from these diverse sources, and we've all kind of become who we are today as Tlingit. That's what I explained. So, a lot of times these days you'll hear somebody say something about someone else, and they'll say, that person's not really Tlingit. His mother is this person, or his father is this person. But a long time ago, that's never how it was. We have very big names in our society, like Qonaku, which was explained to me by Qonaku, his Shangu Keiti, Fred White, my dad's uncle, as meaning little Athabascan. We have other names, Tekinauk, Little Haida. So we have these names that come from all these different places, and some of them even in different languages, that show that we're just because you're something else too, that doesn't mean you're not Tlingit. I wanted to explain that and why I hold on to it so tightly. This is my grandparents' language. My grandparents are the ones that taught me. And we all have a right to learn how to speak and use it with each other.
And I put the phrase in, but if you just check the spelling, make sure I got it right. And yes, I was inspired and responded that, we think differently now than we did then, and the way that we fragment and the way that we sort of identity is prescribed a lot of times. And it's complicated. I'll certainly say, yeah, it does get complicated. But if we just speak Tlingit, I think it gets less complicated. I think it's the English that complicates these identities and these thinking, like whether you're dealing with the DIA or the BIA, That's not the Douglas Indian Association. That is the Department of Indian Affairs in Canada and the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the United States. The way they get us to think about identities is very complicated. But if in Tlingit we can be united, and I shared a story that Haa Cyril George used to tell us, because it's love that makes these things possible, unity and being strong, like a fortress. And the things I think about is, he used to say, well, the other thing, I guess I'll preface it with saying, a lot of people say like Tlingit people are mean or, tough or whatever, like I taught in Sitka one time, and this one lady came up, and she's an elder, but I think also maybe her, you get older, and sometimes if you get a little forgetful, the internal, oh no, not that, but the sometimes the internal sort of things aren't there in terms of what you should and shouldn't say. And she came up and we did a little Tlingit class, and she said, that was really fun. And I didn't realize that Tlingit people laughed. And I said, oh yeah, we laugh all the time. I was like, maybe when you're little, you just saw what we look like when people were stealing all our stuff, but we're still over here telling jokes, And but a lot of people talk about us being really just tough and mean and stuff like that. And I really think that that's misguided and it's misinformation. And so Cyril George would tell us, one time in his village, people came, we got along with it. We got along with so many people, with all the neighboring tribes, like people really overblow it about like constant warfare and stuff, And I think there's a lot of racism attached to those modes of thinking, you know. Uh, but sometimes there were skirmishes, and sometimes people would come attack a village and try to take people to be slaves. And so these people came and they raided the village to take people as slaves. And so it was a surprise attack, and everybody just scrambled to get out of the village. And this guy, he got to safety, and he was thinking, man, I made it. Whew, safe. But then he heard his son crying out because his son got taken. And he said, I love my son so much. I'll go down there and I'll be a slave with him. So he ran down to be with his son. And when this comes from the, elders who grew up speaking and who grew up, even though that the teachers they had were trying to keep the language from surviving in them, and then they made it. He went to Sheldon Jackson. He went to school there in Sitka with Kaseich, Selena Everson, and her brother. And so just thinking of some of these stories, and sometimes we just want to share these things that gave us inspiration while we were, we're always still learning, but when we were really learning how to talk, at least when I was, these were the things that I held on to just say, I can do this, I should do this, I will do this, and to make that firm commitment to speak and to listen. So Gunashchish to those who spoke and who shared, and Gunashchish for listening. Are there any questions about any of that stuff or any language related things? I'm glad Haa has a microphone now so we can listen to him. Ruth?
Could you say a little bit more about the fourth person, they, or people, I mean?
Yes.
That's used?
There are fourth person human and fourth person non-human pronouns. So it kind of depends on what type of pronoun we're talking about. For possessive pronoun, you just say people's. So you could say Haa Atx, people's things. Haa Atx, people's mothers. And so that's how we'd use sometimes if we're going to translate something like Mother's Day, Haa Atx. That way it just has to belong to someone. So you could say the mother of people. When you get into the verbs, then you get into object and subject pronouns. So you could say, like Ḥusteeyí is a good example. It means love of people. So there's an object pronoun in there, which is people. So it happens to people. people are good, and anything like that. You're just talking about generally people. When you get into the fourth person subject, so the object is usually Haa or Q. And the sort of guideline is it's usually Q unless there's a Q verb already, like the weather. So Ḥusteeyí would mean good weather. So usually you'd say Haa Atx, good people. When you get into the subject, it's do, and it's built right into the verb. And so you'll see a whole bunch of, there's quite a few names that have do in there. Gush Dutin is a Tlingit name. It means like somebody sees a dorsal fin. And so there's two ways that I generally translate that, and it kind of depends on the verb, but either people do it or it happens. And so duhayi at is another example. It means a thing that people eat, and that means edible. So like if we were walking and we saw a plant or something, and you know about plants, and we both speak Tlingit, I might say duhayi atake, is it edible? And so that's what I'm asking is, do people eat it? Which got me in trouble in Hawaii because I saw these little seals, and I was just curious. I didn't have a plan. I understand they're highly endangered there, but I just said, do people eat them? And there's people with vests on who protect the seals, which is good stuff. And they kind of acted like I said, can I eat your children? Because they just, no, and so I was like, well, no, But that's the fourth person. And so you'll also see it a lot in names of things. Like Adatki Dultin Ye is the name that elders in Carcross came up with for a daycare. It's a place where people watch children. So you'll see it in a lot of names for things. It's the place where people do this, the place where people do that, the place where this happens to people. And then there's the fourth person non-human, which is, there's really only an object, and then you could have the possessive, but it's at. And so you could say, in some cases, like, you could say, I see something was seen. And that one, sometimes they get a little bit into this sort of mysterious kind of category, like it was an unusual thing. But for the fourth person, a lot of it is just like, people did this thing. And we use a similar way in English, like if Friday was donut day at work and I went in the break room and there was 6 donuts there and I ate them all because I was feeling a little hoggish that day or whatever, and someone came in and be like, what happened to the donuts? I might say, they were eaten. So that's a way you can sort of divert around who did the thing and just say it happened. So that's kind of what I would say about the fourth person. And I don't think that English necessarily has, you could say people. People do it. Yeah, people do that. It's a similar thing in Tlingit.
Is that like when we say the unnamed they, oh, they said this or they say this, in terms of attributing it to unknown people?
Yeah, something more like,
I'm having trouble here.
the focus is sometimes on the action. Like, so you say, I was seen, right? And so that there is like you'd say, Chat with zatin, I was seen, right? When I was trying to sneak in and get the last of the donuts or whatever. I don't know. It's always gonna be donut stealing stories. But
Or like mistakes were made.
yeah, and like the thing happened, right? Like the important thing is like not who did it, but like that it happened. And they'll use this too a lot for like, people used to do this and people used to do that, and so it'll switch to a fourth person sometimes.
Okay, thank goodness, Chief.
Yeah. Is it Avi? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. On the matter of possessives, when you want to connect two nouns, say something like the tail of the dog or the door of the house? How do you construct that?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, well, the dog's tail, it's a body part. So the body parts, it just put those two nouns together. So who owns it, and then what the thing is. So like
Okay.
Kate, ED.
All
Um,
right.
but then like the door of the house, it kind of depends. Like once you start getting into like it's something on something, I would
Uh-huh.
I would probably say kwe hit kahati. So you just put noun, noun, and then you use those possessive suffix that we went over, like dog's bone, or kate
Mhm.
tsaki. So you could do something like that, or
Uh-huh.
tsak would be the unpossessed version of a bone. Uh,
Okay.
so yeah, it's usually with the owner and then the owned thing with a possessive marker, unless it's a body part.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay.
Gunashtish.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Oh, I love you. You'd say. Ich sechan llilku. Especially if you're talking directly to them. You'd say, Ich sechan llilku. It's I love you, grandparent. Yeah, and you can say ach llilku, but if you're talking just to them, you just say llilku. Go straight to it.
One of the words, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
One of the words I heard you say today, and I heard you say before that I was wondering is ayahuan. I was wondering what that meant.
Igu ayachwan is be brave, have courage. And so I'll put it in the chat. So if in Tlingit we certainly just kind of yell things at each other sometimes, and like who should do it and when. And it gets a little tricky sometimes because we've passed this point where sometimes you might have a whole clan that might not have a speaker present, right? And so somebody is up there, and like if someone's speaking, maybe not necessarily on Zoom, but if we were in person and someone was speaking and you just really agreed with what they said, like you would be like saying some things to them, like "Ye aweh," that's how it is. "Ayachaweh," that's correct. Hawasa, that's really so, right? And there's a number of things. Sometimes you'll hear them say, "Isautu achikaniyan." Your in-laws hear you. We hear you. So the thing is, like, you should be the ones who should be doing the supportive statements are the Qunait Qanai, the clan opposites. So the ones who are on the other side. So if an eagle person is talking, I could say some of those things. And a long time ago, it was really like the big people of the clan would do. It's not like everybody just starts hollering. It's like pretty specific people knew who they were. But sometimes I've been in situations where someone's speaking and for whatever, the situations there where maybe there's no one from one of the sides that can understand what the person's saying. And so maybe I'll yell it out just to make sure that, because if you're up there speaking Tlingit and you're really trying it out and doing it in public and nobody's saying anything, it feels like you're really cow decay. You're just kind of falling apart and not really doing a good job. But if it's sort of like the statements really elevate the speech to a higher level, because it's almost like someone's really giving it all with their emotions and their language abilities and the content, and then their opposites just keep lifting it a little bit higher, a little bit higher. Okay, I see a couple of hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. So, if you were to be talking to yourself, like trying to do self-encouragement, would you use the same sentence structure or word structure that you use to encourage others? like for igu ayahwan?
Good question. One is you couldn't do it publicly, no matter how hard the thing was. And so this is where like it's really interesting because you can't. Yeah, I used to work with some folks that really like composing songs, and they just kept saying "Guayahwan" to themselves, and I was like, okay, you gotta stop doing that because you're supposed to lift up other people. And so, but the thing is like there shouldn't be a point where you're struggling and nobody is giving you encouragement. That's also where we're falling apart collectively. So if you start crying or stumbling or, you know, like there should be somebody there who's, and sometimes they'll go right up like and just stand behind you, put their hand on you, you know, and so, but quietly before you go, if you need to give yourself a little pep talk and no one's, you know, maybe your close friends are there and you need to encourage you, what you do is you encourage yourself is you, I would say, ask for help. Haa Atx So, you know, it becomes a bit of a prayer before you even do the thing. That's what I would suggest. And so there was a number of things. So Ach or Ach help me. Ach my ancestors, or you could say Haa our ancestors. Yitich Ach difficulty is in my possession. Because, you know, sometimes we're asked to do the heavy lifting. When long time ago, a lot of times when somebody's father passed away, the kids, at least one of them, were expected to talk and just say something and to give support to their father's people. And so, yeah, and it's not always the case. People will understand because can't do it, too difficult. But there's a lot of stuff, we did a lot of stuff with the words. The words serve these purposes. And so sometimes you did have to do some stuff like that. But you know, and also the clan would spend a lot of time planning things out and figuring out what we're gonna do and who's gonna do it. And they would, I don't know, when I was learning Tlingit, like I think of this immersion in 2005, I think it was, in Haines. And I got up there and I just kept struggling to say certain things because I couldn't put the words together. And there were people like Nora Dowenhauer and Haa Ruth Demert, and they were finishing my sentences for me, you know. And so, yeah, those are the things that I would. And then, you know, have your support group as well, because then you could, and that if it's behind closed doors when you're doing the planning. So like, there's the planning, and there's the process. The process is what the people see. Like you might be at Ku'ik and it's fun and you're doing the thing and you're going through all the motions and you're doing the gifts and the cry songs and all of it. And for the guests, they might be watching like, man, they're just really getting it. And then they don't see backstage. Sometimes people are stressed out and crying and yelling at each other sometimes. And you know, but it's all about like once you get out in front of the people. And if you're going to use this language, you're going to live with this language, give yourself lots of room. You might go to speak at your auntie's funeral and you might not succeed, but don't see that as a failure to the whole culture and language, because maybe you're the only person who stepped up to try it and you brought our language out when it needed to be used. And so, yeah, those are good questions. Casey, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I'm saying this right, and I wanted to ask. I apologize, but I wanted to ask what it meant one more time. Gua yach one.
Yeah,
And did I say that one all right?
yeah. So igu ayach Juan is like sometimes there's like you can hear the separation gu a yach Juan, but sometimes it just smooshes together. You hear people say gu ayach Juan, and sometimes you'll say gu ayach Juan, right? And so it comes out sometimes really fast, and so there are some phrases like that that sometimes really squish together. But gu a yach Juan. And then if you want to say it to more than one person, you change the to yi. Yi gu ayach Juan. And so these are things as well, like if you're trying to get the dance group charged up, if you're trying to get the speaker, you guys are going to go do something in front of the people, and sometimes you try to, whether you're doing a prayer, whether you're just trying to encourage each other before the thing starts, there's a lot that you can do to call. So a lot of times you call on the ancestors for strength, and then you give support. The more support you give to other people, I feel like the more it's reciprocal, right? It's like it's all about balance, I think. Haa Ḳusteeyí. And so they say that, like Haa Ḥuanish, you say like the world just spins around. Whatever you put out there, it just rolls back in your direction.
And what did that exactly translate to? It gua yach one.
That's a good question. Anybody know? There's a few phrases that are really tough.
So one can be like saying, you can use it for, oh gosh, no, I'm getting my stuff mixed up. You go ahead. It's not, I can't explain it either.
Well, I can't explain it either, but my stab at it is E is you, is brave or being brave, yuck is like, and on is a little bit.
Yeah, Juan is kind of like be sure to, right? And so it kind of depends on how it's being used. And so sometimes it's used to soften a command a little bit. So instead of like put that on the table, you'd be like, be sure to put that on the table. It's not really like please. The first time it sounds exactly like the word boot. So the first time I used it with my kids, it was like something like "Hi nach jitsa in Juan," and she said, "I'm not a boot." And so I had to sort of, but then she started to get it and I started to use it more. Yach is like, so like in terms of if you want to start using yach, you could say like something yach, it's like this. It's used in a lot of similes. And then the gu'a part is probably the most interesting, because I've heard speakers who say idu ayach Juan, so it goes from gu'a to du'a. So yeah, I think steady your base is good. Best effort is another thing that I've heard as far as gu'a and people interpreting that. It could be something that comes from a verb, which means to be seated, which it's kind of interesting. And but yeah, there's certain phrases where it gets sometimes a little tricky to really analyze what might be going on with the phrase. Oh yeah, just change the d to a da, so it should go minus I in that case. Yeah, I don't want to fail. I don't want to. And so cow decay means like so you say ha cow decay. Like I really failed, and it's the way I think it's like a verb, and it has to do with like a basket that comes undone, basically. So you're gonna come apart like a basket. But then you get I guess a good time for let me find this thing. I can't always talk and look for things at the same time. So we had an elder who came to visit our classes, and she said, "Haa Ḳusteeyí." And then she'd really laugh, you know. And I asked her about that phrase, and she said, it means you did a good job. But the literal interpretation is you didn't fail and you didn't fall apart. So Haa Ḳusteeyí. And so I found this, I don't know why I found this image of Batman giving a thumbs up, but I thought it'd be a fun one to do, like, and then it turns out like this is from a website where they find pictures and movies of people holding guns and they turn them into thumbs up. And so it was like really layers on, you know, of meaning perhaps. But I think it's important to give yourself encouragement and to give others encouragement as you study and learn and use the language, to really build and maintain a supportive environment that's not competitive, that's not, we've got all these various ways of shutting each other down sometimes, and just being aware of that. And then also being together through the tough stuff, because there are some tough things when it comes to learning and using Tlingit. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Good conversations, folks.
Yeah, a phrase that I learned from you on YouTube that I really have, it's kind of stuck with me, that I like, is "Izegach du ach." The kind of like, I've always kind of wondered what like the deeper meaning of that is. Is it kind of an encouragement of speaking and using the language?
Say it one more time. Isagach duach.
Mm-hmm.
It means people will hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it's really interesting thinking about this verb root ach. So you have hearing. So you could say like choach, I heard it. You have a noise. So you could say like duach, something is being heard by people. And then you have, once you switch the classifier to, you switch it to an S group classifier, and you could say atxasaach, I listened to it. So now you go from hearing to listening, which is, those are different things. And then you could say ich etxasaach, I listened to you. And then there's a different thing where you can put this sa. It gets a little confusing because there's a sa sometimes in the classifier, but this is a sa as a noun built onto a verb. So you could say isachwaach, I heard you. I heard your voice. And so there's some really important things here in terms of speaking and hearing. And coming back to Cyril and Nora, one time Cyril George was given a speech and he said when a person talks, it's like they put up the house posts. And when their clan opposites respond, it puts a roof on the house. And so there's really important things about hearing people and responding. So like the hearing part is just saying like we're listening to you, we hear you. And then the responding part is saying, we don't want your words to just echo off into thin air. And so this happens more and more as you have fewer and fewer people who can understand Tlingit. So sometimes there'll be situations where someone says something pretty amazing, and then everyone just sort of carries on, and someone has to say, wait. We want to acknowledge what you said and say something back to you. And from a cultural perspective, that kind of stuff feels really good, just to know that people are, because it goes back as well. Like the language is complex. There's so many concepts. There's so much history and information and stories. And you know what? None of this stuff was written down. It was all, it was all up here. So like the listening and the hearing part is so important. Yeah. People will hear you. And that's important too, because there'll be more of us, and there'll be more and more of these conversations, and they'll switch over to Tlingit. And then Yidlach would be one person. So Yidlach would be you obtained it, you succeeded, or you defeated that one person. It depends on how it's being used, right? So that single verb can mean all of those things. And heshakau deke is that one as well. Like you didn't, yeah, you did it, right? Atunach yagut is another one. You went through it. Yeah, especially like graduating school, or so, it's kind of seen as sometimes a difficult thing. So you could say stuff like that. And sometimes kind of funny. Yeah, and then going back to what Haa said, there was a Raven story too where he convinces Owl, it's his little owl, to go get the fire for him. And at one point in the story, there's several different versions, and he says, well, I'll be right here giving you encouragement. And so that owl, because the owl's like, well, it's going to burn my beak off. And he had a real long beak. And he's like, I don't want to, it's going to burn my beak off. And Raven's like, well, I got a better one for you right here. And I'll be giving you encouragement. So he's flying back, and he said, and his beak starts burning back, and he's really kind of freaking out. And Raven says, be brave. Everything hurts. You just have to stand it. And so we were kind of laughing because we were like, well, that's true, but that might not have been the encouragement I would have been looking for. But, you know, it's all good. Yeah, do it all the way. Yep. Okay. Okay. Sheesh. Other thoughts or questions? So I thought for today, maybe we'll look at a couple of things. We looked at this possessive pronoun, this relational pronoun, suffix. We looked at this suffix on Wednesday. We could take a look at that. There's the Haa Atx book. We'll read probably a few pages from that and just practice translating. And then I've got this slide of opposites. And then I want to talk to you folks a little bit about two of my teachers, Haa Ḳusteeyí, George Davis, and Shakshani, Marge Dutson, and just share how fun it was to work with them. So maybe we'll start with the Haa Atx text. So let me show you folks on the screen. And then, so it's this one. Let me move this thing, hold on, and open the chat. So what we're doing with this is we are reading it and translating. So we did 3 pages. Gusu John, Wukuch, Gudesa Wukuch, Shane de Wukuch, Datkasa Shane de Wukuch, Shak Askqa Awe Wukuch. Where's John? Boating. Where'd he boat to? Went to the tide, down to the low, what do they call it, tide flats. What did he go to the tide flats for? He went there for black seaweed. Gusu an wugut, adu insa wuat, du tla in wuat, gat has akwaha. Where is Anne walking? Who's she walking with? She's walking with her mom. They're gonna dig clams. Gusu Margaret, du chuch in wuat, gute sahas wuat, ashun has wuat, dasa has ashun. Gauch. Where's Margaret? She's walking with her husband. Where did they go? They went hunting. What are they hunting? Ducks. So that's kind of the pattern. So I think that's where we left off. So what I'd like to do is get 2 readers. If you're comfortable reading, it's a good chance to practice. So you'll say, one person has this side, the other person has that side. And then we'll go through and we'll give you folks a chance to translate it. But if no problem if you don't know, we got lots of folks who can help. It's just good practice speaking, reading, listening, interpreting. Does anybody wanna read? I need 2 folks.
I'll do one.
I could read, but I'm not good at translating it.
No worries, we will help with that.
Okay.
Good.
You go. Okay, Gusu Paul.
Dukak in wuat.
Udesa Haswuat.
Achun has wuat.
Dasa Has Ashun.
Guakan away. Has achun. Achun.
Okay, sheesh. Okay, first line.
Where's Paul?
Next line.
He went with his mother's brother.
And then
Where did they go? They went hunting. What are they hunting? They're hunting for a deer.
sheesh. Okay. Next 2 readers.
I'll do one.
Sheesh. And
I'll go.
sheesh. Good.
Gusu Henry.
Wakuk.
Gude sa wukuk.
Asite wukuk.
Dasa ye adene.
Du yagu asaguk saye.
Good. Sheesh.
Saya.
Ashakuch saya. That was a lot.
Saya. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Interpretations. First line.
Where's Henry?
Next one.
Voting.
Boy.
And where did he go boating?
Yeah. And a seat day.
Down the channel.
Yeah. Went to the channel. Yeah. And dasaye atane.
What's he
When did
doing?
Yeah, what's he doing? Yeah.
What's he doing? What's he working on? Do yagu ashakuch saya.
His boat. And then the picture shows, looks like he's pulling something up.
He's verbing his boat.
Anchoring his boat.
Yes, he's going to anchor his boat. So a couple things is shayena is the word for anchor, and it comes from a verb. So ya will become yain sometimes, or become yay. It's a little bit of a tricky thing. If a verb root ends with ah or oo, if you put something on the end, it will change the vowel. It's just something you got to kind of get used to. Ah becomes a, oo becomes way. It's just like, so there, Lingi has quite a few of these little sort of exceptions, right? So like, but anyways, this is also a future verb. We see it right in the middle, guchsa. So if you got guchsa, guchla, guchsha, right before the verb root, in this case, ya, that means a third person is going to. So you'll start to recognize some of these patterns as well. And for if you're going into advanced Tlingit this year, then you're going to do a lot of this pattern building stuff. Just learn how to put these things together to say, I'm going to, you're going to, we're going to, y'all are going to, they are going to, plural they are going to, people are going to. right? So yeah, yake, sheesh. If you got questions, ask them as we go through. Let's do a couple more of these. Need 2 readers. You only get 2 lines apiece. Start with 1. I need 1 reader.
I can give it a try.
Goodness, sheesh.
I can't necessarily interpret, but I'll try to pronounce it.
Okay, okay. And 1 more.
I'll read.
Sheesh. Cook.
Kusui hun
Hunch. Here.
Shayadade Gu Akun.
dasa ag agwashu agwat. Agwatu. That's going to take me some time.
Oh,
Aqua.
Aquatun.
Aquatun.
Yake.
Janwu Akwakun.
Yake. Goodness, sheesh, han. Okay. Okay. Interpreters. Gusu ihunch.
Male's older brother.
Yes. Where
my older brother?
Your older brother. That's what the I does right here. So if how would I say then, where is my older brother?
Achun.
Gusu achun. Also, this term hunch is a male term. There's a couple of kinship terms that are gender specific. Those who identify as male have hunch, keek, older brother, younger brother, and glak, sisters. Those who are female have shetch, keek, eek. Shetch is older sister, keek is younger sister, eek is brother. So the basic rule is when they're the same gender as you, you identify whether they're older or not. Because that's, the boys tell the boys what to do, the girls tell the girls what to do. That's how it used to be, right? And then you just have sister, so a male has sisters, a female has brothers, but then the other terms depend on if they're older than you or not. And it's interesting because this is not just biological. This would be anybody in the clan, same clan as you, same age group. That's why you gotta know each other's age and everything. And if you're the same moiety and you become very close friends, sometimes you will use this term. So I have a friend, very close friend, and we speak Tlingit to each other, and he says, "Cheesh, keek." So I said, how old are you? And he was younger than me. And I said, "You're the keek. Make my coffee." So it was fun. Okay. Sorry, that was a long rant after the interpretation. Ah. Next line.
They went hunting around the mountain.
Yes. And how can somebody explain to me how is around the mountain working? Because there's some cool stuff going on in here.
It's Robert Zuboff's name, Shayadag.
Oh, Shah-dag. Yes. So Shah is a mountain. A mountain has a da, which is sort of around. It could be around the mountain. It could be the lower part of the mountain. Where the mountain begins to go steep, that's usually called Shaya. So the mountain has a face, basically. And then Shayada would be around the upper part of the mountain. So it's cool because you'll see like sometimes parts of the land also have body parts themselves, and so there's some really fun relationships there. So
And then
we know he went up pretty high.
and the day is going to,
Yeah.
like nail day.
Yeah, so he went up towards the top of the mountain.
Towards the top.
Hunting. So yeah, typically that's a good question whether those should be one word or two. They're probably quite often one word, maybe. It's a good question. Wsiteeyi tuwuch.
Well, I think this is actually something that a lot of us are in discussion about right now. How do we conventionalize some of these things? And we've put together some basic criteria for what could be considered a compound. Like, for example, is there some kind of tonal shift that signals that it's a compound? Or is it, does it include a suffix that's commonly used as a suffix in other words that are compounds, or something like that? So in this case, I would maybe want to say one word, but I guess your inflection could change it too. That's the, like in English, you could say that's the side of the mountain, or you could say that's the mountainside. But the order wouldn't change in Tlingit. So I don't know.
Yeah, I would say yada is certainly acting like one word. And then when they wrote this, back in the day, they wrote it as basically one single word. So yeah, there's a little bit of, there's a dialogue going on. Like, should Haa Ḳusteeyí be one word or should it be two words? And so there's a bit of fine tuning that's going on right now about, how do we make sure we're consistent, and then also how do we make sure that people can see sometimes like these things come from verbs as well. So yeah, cool. Let's hear about
Are we writing the ending day as part of the compound word?
Day is a suffix, so it should be attached to the noun pretty much every time.
Okay. Guess I have to change my habits.
Yeah, day and dach and nach, those ones are suffixes, and so yeah, let me stop sharing my screen so you could share yours. Are you talking? We don't hear you.
Hello?
What's that?
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Were you able to see that?
Thing.
See this picture right here of that drum?
Yeah, what?
That's Cluckhorn Hill, Doc Shanak. See the top part of those peaks of the mountains? That's what's right behind Cluckhorn, and the eyes and the mouth of the mountain. That's kind of like what you're talking about. 1909, Dan Katzik, the one who's holding the drum, is the one who designed that. And so that's kind of what you're referring to.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, and this, the mountains are so important, and the ocean is so important, and so these things have parts, and it gets. I think as you start to learn Tlingit, you start with some of the basics, then you start to get more and more complex as you go through. So yeah, there's a word for the saddle of the mountains, and then there's a word for the pass, and then there's a word for the valley. And so kind of like as you start to stack them together and think about how the landscape works, absolutely. And so I'll show you folks I'll take the screen share back if you don't mind. So here's something that, so I made this, I was in Hawaii and I was watching a kindergarten teacher, and he was, you know, even though Hawaii is a very different land, they have mountain, and then the place where people usually live, and then the beach, and then the ocean, right? So there was so much similar stuff. And so they had this poster up and they had the names for each of these ecosystems, and they were going through one section at a time and teaching the kids, all in Hawaiian, and I can only speak a little Hawaiian so I could understand some basics of what was going on. But they were sort of talking about what kind of plants do you see up there, which ones do we use, which ones, what are they for, what do we know about them, here's the animals, what does it eat, what is it like, what do we know about it. And then they started moving down section by section. So I wanted to create something like that so we could, you know, maybe tomorrow when we start our class with conversation, we'll just take a look at this and talk about some places and what we find there typically. And it's a little different. If you live in Teslin, it's different than if you live in Juneau, than if you live in Ketchikan, but we could still have these conversations with a lot of this stuff. And so, yeah, I was thinking about that, just sort of having this conversation and just going through. So Shaki is on top of the head. And that works for a person too, like Shaki At. That's where that name comes from, the thing on top of a head. Shaya is, you know, and again, like these, do you squish them together or do you not? And it kind of depends probably on how you're using it. If you're just going through and naming these different parts of the mountain, those are two words. But once you start, you could smush them together a lot of times as well. Sha Da, Askatu, Niche, which gets a little complicated if you're talking about going. Here's the complicated part: is you don't niche day, as far as I know. You ikde and you yande. So the beach is a really important part because it's got two different ways to say it. You say niche if you're on the niche. Otherwise, you got to say ik from the inland towards the beach, or from the shore, yande, from the water to the beach. And that only works for the ocean. This doesn't work, doesn't apply to lakes or rivers. And then you have, there's a couple of different ways. Qis Shuyi or Ta Shuyi is the place where the tide goes up and down. And it kind of depends on which part, because there's also Hlain, which would be when the tide goes way out, and then you have the tide flats. Each is a boulder that the tide goes up and down on. And it could be a reef, it could be, you know, a pretty big one where the sea lions live, but not really big enough to be an island yet, because if it's an island, you have Khat, and then you have Hintak, and then Eat, which is the deepest parts of the ocean. Hlain is tide flats, yeah.
Hintak, what does that exactly mean compared to eat? Like, how do you differentiate between the two?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, Keen Yik is basically, Keen Yik can mean a couple of different things. For a person, it means you're standing in the water, but if you laid down, you wouldn't be submerged in it. But Keen Yik also means for a boat to be on the water, because it doesn't submerge. It shouldn't, anyways. Heen Tak means it's deep enough to submerge, and that could mean also like I'm totally in under the water. So and then Heen Tak Ka would mean I'm like if I had a scuba suit on or whatever, and I'm walking down on the surface below the ocean. And then Eat is down where the halibut live. That's basically, once you get some big old halibut down there, you're in the Eat. Good questions. Good dialogue.
Eat. Didn't hear too much, huh?
Yeah, I started popping like Eat Ka, like that's when I started noticing it, because hanging out with Kushtauko Bill Fawcett, and he was pointing out, like he said, there's a name for king crab. It's eat kas'ow. And I was like, oh, like a Dungeness on the halibut, because eat ka is often like translated as on the halibut hole, is in English how they'll say it, because that's where you go and you get the halibut. Yeah, desert. I don't know of a word for desert. That's a good question.
Wanix an hook.
Tsienaka.
On hook.
On hook. There you go.
Kachutlatk hook.
Oh, okay. Dry land. So on is, oops, there shouldn't be an apostrophe there. On is land, as in usually a village. Like people will think of a village a lot, but it could also mean the land that's owned by somebody. Hook is dry, and then atk is also land, but more specifically the soil. So like the dirt of the land, the earth itself. And then there's eo, which is sand. Sorry, I'm not putting the English in there. Eo is sand. So you could probably say, yeah, a place that's dried all the way out, because yeah, hook is to be dried up. Okay.
Yeah, maybe that yan uwa hukue, I guess.
Oh, you can. Goodness, sheesh.
Oh, I bet Haa Kszege would know though.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
We'll have to get the Carcross delegation to add, because there's a little desert in Carcross. Tleo. And tleo is sand, and it could also be, there's a verb that's like, which was saying like the sand was really sandy. And so what they were talking about in this story is it was a place with no rocks in the water, which was always important because we have dugout canoes, and so the people always knew the good spots to land, because you don't want your canoe to get all busted up. And yeah, tleo yachyeti. Okay. Goodness, sheesh. Okay, that's good. I think we'll go, let's see, we got 15 minutes left. Oh. So do you guys want to do a couple more of these sentences? Do you want to look at opposites? I don't think we have time to revisit the suffixes, but we could do that tomorrow. First one to speak is to pick. Look at
Opposites.
Okay, there we go. Sheesh. So I'll give you guys a bit of history with this project. There's this little packet of things that we found at some like little store that sells like used kids clothing and toys and stuff. And Mariah picked it up. She thought it would be really neat to practice with the kids. And as I was going through, I was like, well, I don't know how to say these things. So I took it to my teachers. So this is Haa Ḳusteeyí. His name in English was George Davis. He was Takdain Tan from Huna, but he grew up in Cake, so he spoke like Kwan. He spoke like the people of Cake. And then Shakshani, Marge Dudson, who's Ishkitan. They were wonderful, wonderful speakers to work with. I took a bunch of stuff to them, translating pictures to Tlingit, English to Tlingit, Tlingit to English. And they were really fun, really, really fun. Lots of laughing and other things. And so basically, there's two puzzle pieces, and the kids are supposed to look for them and match them up. And there's no language on it, right? So it doesn't say anything. So as we looked at it, we had to sort of sometimes figure out, well, what is this thing trying to convey? And so to say crooked, you'd say kauzetich. And it could also mean twisted, right? And it could also mean cross-eyed in some cases. So then the opposite of that was straight ahead. Yadachun.
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 Full of liquid. Shawakit.
Sorry, I'm having trouble.
Siri tleshawaskuata. Shawakit.
Shawakit.
And so if it's solids, like if this was a jar full of rocks, that'd be different than a jar full of what looks like orange juice or something. And empty, and what's interesting is like this is a verb, this is a verb, this is a direction. It's not a, I don't think it's a verb. This is a verb. This is a noun, is it? What is this thing? Haa Ḥusteeyí. Haa Ḥusteeyí. So that's what you say when something is, it's an empty container. There are ways to say like it poured out, but that's not, you know, when they looked at the picture, this is what they said. For something to be long, yayat.
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 And the opposite, short. And in this case, it could mean too short. Yekuwach.
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 And if you want to know the name for shorts, like a pair of shorts to wear, Yekuwach itakatash. So too short pants. So we looked at these two pictures, and the first one was small. Yekugenk.
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 When you get into big and small, you're going to say it differently whether it's a living thing or not. Just keep that in mind. So this is a non-living thing, small. If you put cha in front of it, you're not saying small anymore, you're saying a little bit. Chayegugenk is a little bit, yegugenk is small. Okay. Yekuge.
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 So that is, it's big. And so it's interesting too to sort of reflect on this. We did this years and years. I can't remember what. Maybe this was 2015, perhaps, when we did this, 2016. And so yekuge means it's this big. So you're sort of comparing it to something. So this would be something if you're sort of, and it's interesting too, because it could also mean, is this many? So I've heard someone who said, they named all their houses. This was Kingisti, David Katzig, named all the Shangukedi houses in Jilqat and Qut. And he said, Yekuge ha hitki. And then one time, Nora, she said, Yekuge ahyukatungi. That's how big my speech is. So a little living thing, let me make sure I'm chatting this to everybody. I put it in, okay. So a little living thing would be yeksugenk. Yeksugenk.
Yekugenk.
Yeksugenk. Like a little mouse or something. I don't know. Look.
Well, how is that different from like Utsk and Klein?
Plain.
Yeah, actually, good question. So usk is a bit of a it's an exclamation, like saying little, cute. And it could also be uski. So you can say uski yak. It's a little tiny boat. So usk is tiny or cute. Like some you got a little baby and the baby starts speaking Tlingit. Usk. It's like so cute. So cute. It's like it's also like it's getting into this realm like it's so cute it can't handle it. So that's kind of usk. Yeksugenk is just sort of getting straightforward to like it's small. It's a little creature. So you say "Qanachawi yeksugenk away." We what do they call it? Kunaye? I always forget. Chipmunk. They're real small. And then plain is comes after. It's an adjective that comes after a noun. Yak plain, a big boat. And so when you start getting into like yage is big or plentiful, plain is also big. There's not a huge difference. It's just sort of like what you're saying at the time. So hit plain, a big house, and that's sort of getting more into like just describing the noun. We say hit. That house is really big. So it just depends on if you're going to use a verb or a noun. And for some of them, there's not a huge difference. Good question. It's heavy. Yadash. Yadash.
Yadash.
And this one also means important, or sometimes like sometimes you'll say it in English like, that meaning it was really heavy, right? And that means like it was intense. It was, and so yadash could be used for that as well. So sometimes they'll say yadashi ataya. It's a heavy thing. And sometimes they're talking about like big like death and dealing with stuff. And so yeah, it works for that. Yadash. Not heavy. Heshudash. Heshudash. And let me well, I guess okay, so there was a question in the chat. Maybe we'll stop at not heavy. And so yeah, so hesh, so at the front of this verb is hesh. But you could also say tesh or tleish. In some communities they'll say tish. And it's all doing the same thing. And every now and then it'll contract all the way just to it. So you could say shadashi ataya, and it could contract just to the letter L. Shadashi at would be it's a light thing. It's not a heavy thing.
You said yadash, and then you changed it to shledash.
So I said shadash.
Okay, I thought that shledash was for a human and yadash was for a non-human.
Oh yeah. So shadash would be for a living thing. Yes. So I guess a better example might be shidzi. Shidzi is difficult. Ushzi, not difficult. Shushzidain, easily. But those are getting pretty complicated. Just trying to show where the tlesh can contract to a single L. Chiakushke is another one, like carelessness or being unwise. And then there was a question, so we'll end with this. There was a question in the chat. There's like a car that just went by or something. Okay. Taking out the trash. So now we get into Tlingit categories, classification. So I guess my first thought is it a can that you roll? Is it a bag that you carry, because we have to talk about how we move things around. So when I had some neighbors, and we were housemates. They had it was like a little duplex. And sometimes I would ask if they would take out the garbage, and they could speak Lingítx, so I'd send them a text. So, ito agesugu gande, how do I say? Ito agesugu gande yisahuti wiklich takit. Do you want to drag the garbage can outside using a handle? But if I was saying, take this bag of trash from the house and bring it outside, I would probably say, gande sa inwiklich, because you're carrying a full container.
What if
And
you're
then,
dropping it through a chute?
oh, you're dropping it? Yeah, because you could also say nashkit, which is throw it away. But I would probably go with sa'in. So you're taking it somewhere, and then the command form will be sa'in, that's the verb, for carry this full container. Or I would say naschut or something like that for like drag it outside. So it kind of depends. And so I guess before the week is over, we're going to have to talk about carrying verbs and handling things a little bit. Oh, yeah, let me put that in the... Oops, I'm not typing in the chat. So, sa'in. And I'll show you real quick where you could find a list of some of these things, just to get us thinking about how categories work in Lingit. So there is a book called Haa Ḳusteeyí. So the books that currently exist for teaching Tlingit is there's Beginning Tlingit and a Beginning Tlingit workbook, which is sort of saying like, just getting started, start here. We're going to teach you the sounds. We're going to teach you some names of things. We're going to teach you some phrases where you could fill in the blanks, teach you how to introduce yourself, and teach you how to talk about the weather, and start getting you to think about verbs as you learn more and more of these phrases. Haa Ḳusteeyí kind of documents the ins and outs of the grammar of the language. Teaching grammar and how the language works is a variety of different approaches to doing so. And so the idea of creating this text was trying to sort of say, here it is for people that don't study linguistics, because we need to just learn how to use the language and trying to kind of break down how everything works. So there are some, I think I could call them handling verbs. So here they are. Let me try and zoom in on this. So there are even more than this, but basically, achjit is to my possession. So you're going to say where the thing is going. Then you're going to have a verb. And here the verb is ti, which is to carry a general compact object. Then you could change the classifier and you get sati, and you have a complex object, which would be a phone, a belt, something with moving parts inside. Kati would be a round thing, like an apple or a basketball. Kasati would be a hoop-like object, like a bracelet. Jiti would be a rope, picking it up by one of the ends. Jikati would be a coiled rope. Jiksati would be uncoiled rope or yarn, where you got to sort of scoop the whole thing up. Tun would be an empty container. Sa'in would be a container with things in it. Katun would be a stick. Satun would be a longer stick that you got to use two hands. like a broom or a rifle. Kasatan would be a small stick-like object that you could carry with one hand, like a pencil. Sanu would be a living creature, like a puppy or a kitten. Sata would be a dead creature or a sleeping baby. I gotta add sleeping baby to that because you can lift a baby up and they don't really wake up. Sorry, I spilled some water. Ach is a cloth-like object, like a towel or a blanket. Shana would be a stack of towels. And this all comes down to like, you sort of talk about how you carry the thing. Quetch is something cupped in your hands, like you're gonna bring some water or sand. Saneh would be plural objects of different kinds. Sha'at would be baggage or personal belongings. Kajech would be all of one type of thing, or hand me those things and it's going to take you multiple trips. And, oh, that's kashajech. So kajech is all of one type of thing, and kashajech is using several trips to bring the particular things here. So, gande nasa'in way, take the garbage outside. That would be a good starting point for taking out the trash. And yes, you can get this. Oh, it should be on Amazon. I'll take a look tonight and I'll see if I could find. It's supposed to be a kind of on-demand printing, but I'll double check and see. Let's see.
Yeah, so I purchased all your books when you first sent them out. And so I was wondering if there's a change log so I can actually go through and hand update my book. I would happily support you and buy another one, but I also feel like that's kind of harmful to the environment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think there was a few corrections and updates, and I'll have to. Boy, I should have made a change log. That would have been a really nice thing to do for people. I'm afraid I'm not that organized. But yeah, I don't think there was anything like really huge, like a few terms that sort of changed, just sort of thinking of when you get into like some of these little prefixes to conjugate the verb, whether there's two na things or there's two ga things. And I think they're actually probably just the same thing at this point. So it's really fine-tuned stuff. But I don't think there was anything too huge as far as the changes go.
Gonna shush.
Okay. Okay, folks, gonna cheesh. And just grab a handling verb when you're first getting started. If you're just saying t for everything, that's fine because we can diversify as you go along. But just remember, like the type of object, it all comes down to how you carry it. Because I was guessing sit-in for a little plastic cup of mandarin oranges, but the elders told me it would be achji te. And I was like, why? And they said, because when you flip it over, it doesn't spill. So it has to be spillable to be sit-in. I was like, all right, sounds good to me. So yeah, I got a list of them. I found a few others the other night too, so I'll maybe add to this list at some point. But there's a few of them that you use on the regular, right? Like sati is a good one, like hand me my phone, you know. So for conversation topics, I think let's take a look at this ecosystem thing and just we'll start on the mountaintop and we'll work our way down all the way to the halibut hole. And we'll just sort of, I'll use the mouse to show us where we're going. And just think of things to say as we, and even if you're just naming creatures that are there, just throw a name out. And then those of us who could speak a little bit, maybe we'll say a couple things about a porcupine or whatever the thing is. Okay, gonna cheese, folks. Haa Ḳusteeyí.
Ganashish.
Johan.
Jish Ekwasatin Yon.
Wati.
Yakin.
Oh.
Ganashish.
Echa.
Ganashish.
Ganashish.